So the first item that we have in here is convert construction part. That this part, this item actually is for if you want, for example, the elements that are related to convert construction, like for example assembly, for example, GURP part, for example, if you want to transfer to Navisworks, they will be used. That we have them since, for example, 2022 version. That if you have the older version, you don't have these items. So I will create a kind of, for example, a wall in here, and this wall, actually, let's create a kind of duplicate as an example test. And for example, some layers will be created here, up, like this, for example, for a material, different material, for example. Let's consider a different material for it. Okay, 50 millimeters. And then, for example, let's copy that. Of course, it doesn't need copying. For example, let's duplicate 2025. We have duplicate option here. For example, something here. Of course, maybe you need to add some layers for here. Let me just set it 100. Yes. Inside, for example, 50, and outer side will be 100. Let's click on OK. For example, we will have a kind of wall like this in here, and this wall will be selected in here. And from this part, of course, let me just turn it to group part in here, that the layers actually could be seen separately in here. So with due attention to the explanation that I gave you, let me just type NW on keyboard, that I will have this window first. If you remember, we just created a kind of short cut, and you can do it, for example, by adding 2. So we'll go into the direction of the actually NWC. Let me just click on Navisworks settings, and by default this item is not activated. Let me just inactivate all of these items in here. Of course, let me just activate embed texture in here. Of course, we'll talk about it in future. Let me just inactivate this one in here, so that we can talk about them one after one. So let me click on OK and save. We'll wait that there's a processing of the transforming of the NWC will happen in here. When NWC happens in Navisworks, it will be open really faster. Let me click on OK. Let me go through the direction that we have. We get sure that, for example, file type is on NWC. Let me click on OK, and let's open it in here. If you pay attention right here, my dear friends, in this part, we don't have these walls actually as a kind of layer. I mean, for example, because I just divided into the parts in here, it won't be shown to us. If you want, for example, because it is in construction part, if you want to export it, of course, it's enough that you, for example, activate this item. Let me just remind you that if it got added from or since 2022 version of the Revit. So if I click on OK, I can just save it on it without, for example, closing Navisworks. So this is here that this item was really important for us. If you remember, I told you that you have to activate this item, because if it is inactivated, for example, by default it is inactivated. Yes, so if it is inactivated, you cannot just override the files that from Revit to Navisworks. You have to close the Navisworks and again just open it. So let's just click and activate, for example, this one. The first time you have to close Navisworks, but in future you don't need, and you won't need to close the Navisworks, for example. Yes, just for once you need it. So let's close on let's click on this and click on yes. Despite Navisworks is open, Revit file with the new settings will be already in here first. So actually, because, and if you want, for example, to update, for example, the file into Navisworks, you will need to click on F5 or, for example, click on refresh. You will see that it is updated and is very easily, we can have different parts of the this element here. So if I again return to a Revit, for example, NW, and let's just inactivate this item, for example. OK, save. So we'll wait that this exporting is done. And if I click on refresh icon in here, you will see we'll have the main geometry in here.